Welcome to Software Leaders Uncensored with Steve Taplin. Welcome to Software Leaders Uncensored, where tech leaders drop the filter and just tell it like it is. I'm your host, Steve Taplin, a serial technology entrepreneur who's launched 30 companies. 20 of those have failed, but 10 I have scaled to success. I turned that roller coaster of a ride into my book, Fail Hard, Win Big. This is my story on how you turn failure into your biggest competitive advantage and how custom software played a key defining role in every company I've done. Now I'm the CEO of Sonatify Technology. We're a US-based company that provides nearshore engineering teams, helping existing teams with staff augmentation through fully managed projects. We have a fun guest today, Jason Truppi from ForceMetrics. Jason is a former FBI agent. He has co-founded many entities as a computer science expert and has some really good stories. This is going to be fun. Jason, welcome.
Thank you so much, Steve. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Jason, if you would, take a few minutes and walk our listeners through the journey of your career.
Absolutely. So a computer science background, instead of getting into software development, I actually had a real interest in cybersecurity. So I became a network engineer, specifically focused on securing networks. And then I was recruited into the FBI. FBI at the time was looking for people with computer science backgrounds and networking backgrounds. And so I went through the whole process, went to Quantico, landed in New York City as my first office of assignment, where I worked counterterrorism, organized crime. And then they brought me into one of the first cyber national security squads that they created in the Bureau. So I was one of a handful of agents that had a technical background in engineering that was focused on foreign nation state, mostly adversaries, using technical means of their military to hack into U.S. interests, whether that was clear defense contractors, Department of Defense, but even private entities like banking institutions and other large companies.
So we can't talk about them or you'd have to kill us. So we don't want that.
No, that's not true. We could talk about a lot of the overarching, the issues that are in cybersecurity. I think we all know that it's a very a big problem. It's also a big industry. So this is before it became a $300 billion industry that it is now. So I worked in the FBI, became a supervisor in headquarters in DC, and then I left for Silicon Valley. And what I did is I actually dusted off my development skills and started building enterprise cybersecurity software for the same companies and organizations, DoD and banking institutions that were being affected by these intrusions. So I did that for many years, and that's really where I got my chops of learning how to scale and build an engineering team and build a scalable product and all of those things you need to learn early on. And then I started going off on my own and building my own businesses. So I got into cybersecurity consulting. I built a couple fintech companies, which I sold. And then I got into insurtech of all things, which had a little bit of a cyber component. And then during COVID, my old FBI partner, Andre McGregor, who's the CEO of the company, called me up, had this great idea about ForceMetrics. And I said, absolutely, we're back to the mission of public safety and can use the learnings we've used over the many years of building software.
Awesome. Tell us about ForceMetrics.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're a decision assistance platform for public safety that allows you to make better, more informed decisions in the moment. And the way that I describe that to folks who don't know public safety really well is for the last 3 decades in public safety, we've been collecting various types of data from when you call a 911 call, and a dispatcher writes their dispatcher notes. They send an officer to your house. You talk to an officer, they write a report, and then they send that data back to their various systems of record. All of that data is being collected in a lawful way, but they're from different systems. So the radio system is collecting different data. The dispatcher and the 911 systems are collecting different data. The report systems are widely different depending on whether you have a traffic accident or if it's a domestic violence situation, it might be different reporting. And so all these reports are stuck in data silos that are typically legacy databases, so things that are built in the late 90s and still being sold today. And so we combine all that data, we normalize it, we aggregate it, and then we give it back to the users in a very usable way. So we always say, if you can use Google Maps or Zillow, you can use our tool. And that makes it really, really accessible for public safety, which is not the norm in this space.
So who's the typical client then of the data that you're aggregating and cleaning up and presenting in more readable, useful fashion?
Well, I would say, public safety is an important vertical But we really like to say we're improving safety. And what I mean by that is, yes, we're starting with public safety. So that's law enforcement agencies, that's fire, that's dispatch and emergency medical companies. But we're also moving into, with this type of data, there's other corporate security organizations that also need this type of data and this type of accessibility. So think about retailers, organized retail theft is a huge topic. Insurance companies, trying to determine how to insure buildings that might have had lots of incidents or problems. These are all, safety is a hot topic, and it's a really important one to not only the public safety users, but also the citizens. And so we are starting in public safety, but we're focusing on other verticals as well.
Well, tell us about some fun projects you're working on.
Absolutely. Well, I think the beginning vision of this company really was to focus on the officer and dispatcher. Those are the folks that are taking your 911 call and showing up at your door. And what we did is we really looked at how do we get a tool to where we can get the information they need to make a decision when the seconds matter. So a 911 call is coming in, it's a bad day, whether that's a traffic accident or some sort of domestic violence situation, it's really important that seconds matter in those moments. And so we wanted to put a tool in the hand of people that can get as much information as they can, understanding who might be calling. Have they called before? Is there any sentiment to the previous calls, like domestic violence or someone who might be unhoused or having just a social anxiety issue? And you got to realize that not all calls for service, not all 911 calls are crime related. About 75% of them don't end up in an officer report. So you have things like traffic accidents, emergency medical situations, but you also have crime. And so we really took that focus and focused in on those particular user personas, and we saved them lots and lots of time in their daily operations. So really just, taking kind of like a digital co-responder, if you want to call it that.
Okay.
Since then, we're focusing on more user personas. So that really we're starting to get into some really interesting areas like analytics and metrics. And so we're now able to support analysts that are looking at larger strategic issues or problems. Again, whether that's crime or social service needs, those are important to a city or city managers and police chiefs. And so now we're building out a comprehensive analytics platform that allows you to go from that very high strategic view of, hey, here's a problem that we're facing as a city, and then drill that down into an operational or tactical view. And so we started at the bottom up approach, and now we're kind of going top down, which is really exciting.
Absolutely amazing. And man, any industry that needs help, I'm not here to get political, but I get very upset when people talk about defunding the police, because I can't think of anything worse than when you call 911 or you have an emergency and you can't have somebody there to help you. And what an amazing thing. Are there other companies doing what you guys are doing? I sure haven't heard of them.
Well, you make a good point, and I do want to hit on this topic. Is there is a major staffing shortage that's happening not only on the police side of the house, but also the dispatcher side. Some police agencies are 25% understaffed right now, and they can't fill the staffing. We have one agency, in fact, that is 50% of the entire staff has been on the job 5 years or less in a police agency.
Unbelievable.
So that's the reality of law enforcement in a lot of these, I would say, medium to larger cities. Some of the smaller cities don't have as much problems with the staffing, but this is a major problem. And what we're taking is, and every single employee is being asked to do more with less. And so what we built is actually shaving off those minutes or hours worth of work to find the data that they need to get their job done. And so I really think, when we're taking data that, looking at data that took historically so many hours to produce, we're able to actually amplify those users. And then adding AI into that workflow, we can actually, allow AI to do some of the heavy lifting of the analysis and actually surface even more context to that user.
Awesome. Well, tell us about your engineering team that's pulling off this much needed essential data.
Yeah, I love our engineering team. We're a small shop. So yeah, we certainly have other competitors, as you mentioned. None of them are doing it the way that we're doing it. We've taken a really, truly a modern approach to not only data engineering, but architecture and design of a product, and then front-end user interface. So I have a 10-person team. It's split between, developers and data engineers. Everyone can code. And then I have, some DevSecOps folks as well. But yeah, it's a great team. We're small, we're nimble, and it's really exciting working with them all.
Are you guys in office, remote, hybrid?
Yeah, we started this company right in the middle of COVID, so we are fully remote. I'm pretty used to working remote once I landed in Silicon Valley in 2015. But yeah, we built the entire company completely remote, and it's been very successful. We do have to bring in really good communications tools and do a lot of stuff asynchronously and make sure that everybody is on the same page. But, those challenges have been solved for with many tools that are out on the market.
So I would absolutely love to hear how a Quantico trained former FBI agent hires software engineers in this remote world of the ability to cheat with AI tools and other things. This should be good.
Oh boy. Yeah, there's everything on the market. I don't know if you've heard of like tools like Cluely and things that can like read your screen and be active while you're asking questions. And certainly you can see people kind of typing into ChatGPT and some of the questions. Yeah, I think, one of the things we really focus in on, and this isn't just a FBI Quantico thing, this is really just a cultural thing within our business, is we hire for the person first. We want someone who is intellectually curious, personable, they're here for the mission, and we know that they're willing to learn, right? I think that's a really important aspect, because even if you hire someone for a particular position, you may move them to another position, and you just still want a good person working for you. And that's really the first element that we look for. And then, of course, we get into skill set. We want to make sure that you understand computer science, programming, to a good degree. And then, of course, we do live coding and testing in front of the team. And I think another aspect is it's not just your coding skills. It's, can you explain the problem, and can you explain the solution to the problem that we're presenting? And I think those are all things that we look for amongst other things in the space.
Have you had an issue? I know we have, where we've literally caught people cheating, like on the interview, and have you run into this?
Well, if you cheat on the early parts of the interview on the humanity part, then certainly that's like an automatic rejection. And yes, we have seen that. Not only that, I mean, you're seeing people that are coming in, not turning their screen on, or they're, you can hear other people in the background answering questions for them and things like that. There's a lot of scams that are happening. I'm sure, a lot of the listeners are dealing with the amount of volume that's coming in, the fake resumes, and just being able to sort through that. But actually using AI is not something that we treat as a bad thing. When we actually get to the technical skills challenge, we ask them to use AI. So if they're using Cursor or any other tool that, or Cloud Code or anything else that they're using, that's actually a good thing. But you still need to explain to us the problem and how you're solving it. So again, you can use AI tools to assist you. And in fact, if you don't use it in one of our technical challenges, that's a red flag for us. Because at this point, if you're not using it, you're not working at the velocity that we need.
I love it. And that is the reality of where we are. And I get frustrated because recent graduates, computer science graduates, have a real problem getting a job. And guess what? Universities won't teach how to use AI because it goes against what they believe are their ethical standards. But yet no company wants to hire a brand new engineer. That it's hard enough for brand new engineers, let alone ones that aren't highly trained on how to use AI to assist them. It's frustrating.
Yeah, you make a really good point. I just had a conversation with a new, recently graduated computer scientist, and I said the same thing. Luckily, he'd been using the tools on the side, but they need to be in the schooling. You certainly need to know the core computer science concepts. You can't just finish your assignments with pure AI, but you need to take your own initiative and learn those tools as a up and coming computer scientist, for sure.
So with your business and the type of agencies you deal with, are you restricted on tech stacks and clouds that you're allowed to use?
I think when we first started, the answer is yes. We had to really primarily use AWS GovCloud, and we have a really big compliance requirement. It's called the Criminal Justice Information System Compliance Framework. It's set out by the DOJ, and anybody who has access to sensitive law enforcement information, which is the officer reports or criminal history from NCIC and things of that nature, you have to be background checked, fingerprinted in all the jurisdictions you're in. So there's a huge friction there just hiring employees and getting them onboarded to the various jurisdictions. There's no universal way to submit that. Like there's no national database or anything. It's like state level, regional level. So there's that friction. And in the beginning, it was AWS GovCloud was FedRAMP High approved and allowed for secret and top secret information from the federal government to be stored. So certainly it met those requirements. Nowadays, other cloud infrastructure is now compliant for those type of data stores. All the data has to also live inside the United States, which is another a factor of all that. And what's nice is we really built our infrastructure as code, which means it's completely mobile. We try not to use as many cloud native tools as we need. And so if we had to switch between, AWS or GCP or Azure, we could do that with our Terraform configurations.
Gotcha. What's a brutal lesson at this point in your career of things you've done that you wish you would have learned earlier in your career?
Oh man, I would say that, assuming that your product is the best and taking that and saying, hey, we're going to be able to go to market with the best product and win. That's not an assumption you want to go with. You could have the best product in the market, but if it's too complicated, your buyer doesn't understand it, and you don't have that level of education to the users and the buyers, you can very quickly fail, even with the best team and the best product. So that's one thing I learned early on. And we built that philosophy in, which is before we started this company, we did a lot of market analysis. Who's in the market now? We talked to 50 police chiefs. We talked to tons of users. Even though I have a law enforcement investigative background, I still talk to every user I can get my hand on before we launched this company. And that really is why we're very successful, is because there's elements of all of our user personas built into our product and the workflows that we've built so far.
Gotcha. Amazing. I have to laugh, but yes, just because you have the best project, software product doesn't mean you're successful. And I have to laugh. Salesforce, in my opinion, is one of the worst products ever, but they are such marketing geniuses that every Fortune 1000 company and more uses them, but they all hate it, but they still use it. And That's kind of the opposite scenario. And that's where the product sucks, but the marketing is amazing.
Well, if you look at the beginning of Salesforce, they did find that need. The CRMs were all disjointed. They didn't integrate. You didn't build something that you can build kind of a low code, no code type of capabilities on top of it. And then bringing in all those channels where you're allowing others to build on top of your product was really, there wasn't really anybody doing that at the time. In fact, my last company, a large cybersecurity company I was with, took that same kind of Salesforce model and said, let's solve for the underlying problem first, and then build the modularity into the kind of middleware and front end layer that allowed other integrators to integrate into it. And it's very successful business model, but you're absolutely right. That's how they started, and they built a monster.
I have no doubt they were innovators when they started. I'm talking fast forward to present day, but
yeah, I hear you.
All right. So as a tech leader, what's your biggest challenge you're facing now?
Yeah, I would say the speed of this market is accelerating at a pace that I've never seen any vertical do it. And I think mostly it's because, unfortunately, Silicon Valley kind of left public safety behind in the late 90s and early 2000s. Unfortunately, there was a lot of money invested at that time. .com boom, lots of people trying to solve really good problems. And by the way, there's still good technology that still exists from that era that's being used daily. Which is kind of scary, but it's really solid tech. But there really hasn't been a lot of major innovation. But you have a couple innovators in the space that have made some evolutions. But with us coming into the space, changing the way that law enforcement's actually operating from the ground level is really opening everybody's eyes into what the future could be and how we can solve for these like staffing shortages and make better use of the data and have better outcomes, whether that's, again, a social service need outcome or a criminal outcome. They're actually seeing the effect of that. And I think that's where the amount of money and investments being made. You have lots of funds that are pushing into this space now. And that all has happened in the last 2 years. So we're just trying to make sure that we're staying as the tip of the spear. And we're looking at everybody, all of our competitors and all the adjacent companies to make sure that we're also staying at pace with them.
So I'm not very educated on the public safety GovTech's segment. Are these agencies spending the money for these new, innovative, and better ways? No doubt there's a need. Sometimes politics holds things up. Is money flowing from these agencies to invest in great things like what ForceMetrics is doing?
The answer is yes. I mean, the market is heating up exponentially. If you look at a city's budget,
which is great to hear.
Right.
That makes me happy as somebody who very much respects public safety.
Absolutely. Well, if you look at a city's budget, anywhere between 50 and 75% of a city's budget goes to public safety. That's police, fire, and EMS. So it's a huge investment. It's a very expensive proposition. You're creating a service where you can call a number, and at any moment, you'll get someone to answer your call in seconds. And then they'll likely send someone to your house if you have a serious need, and they'll be there in minutes. And it's 24 by 7, 365. So it's an expensive proposition. There's lots of amazing technology and hardware and firmware that goes into this. But again, the innovation hasn't been there. I think a lot of the companies that had sold into this market had kind of rested on their laurels, so to speak. And when we and others come in the space and really show some of the newer technologies and the newer kind of tech stacks, it really does shine to show them, hey, we can do better.
Awesome. So what are some of the biggest technical outcomes and business outcomes you're focused for the remainder of the year?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I like to say is, our metrics aren't just based on, our velocity and, user adoption. It's really, quite honestly, in lives saved. Like, how are we having an effect on an agency daily? And I said at the beginning of this company, if we save one person's life, it's worth it. And we've now saved countless lives, with this type of data. We're hearing from 911 operators where they had no information. It was a 911 call hang up, and it turns out they were able to locate the data through our platform to figure out which apartment someone was calling from and save someone from having a stroke, for example. Overdoses happens quite often as well. And then certainly solving crime and closing cases factor into there as well. And so what's really interesting about this space is, again, how do we do more with less? And I always think about how do we continue to keep our platform simple. We're working with lots and lots of data. And data is overwhelming to people if you put too much on a screen or you kind of build these very complex analytics. So I always constantly tell my team, my product team, and the engineers, hey, what can we do to make this page more simple? How do we make it more accessible to the users? And so we really keep that kind of tenet going in everything we build.
So talk about how you've been able to integrate AI into your engineering, into your operations, and your product.
Absolutely. Yeah, we've been using machine learning techniques, the classical machine learning techniques from the inception of this company. So a lot of natural language processing, named entity recognition, topic modeling, text summarization, all of those things. We're certainly looking at LLMs. What's really interesting is you have this kind of generative versus non-generative AI. A lot of the traditional statistical analysis techniques are not generative. And so in public safety, you can't have hallucinations and generative AI in very critical components, right?
That would be bad.
And so, right. So we really stick to the classics and they work quite well. You get really good accuracy rates and they're also cost effective. We are trying to look at the more modern LLMs. We've been looking at LLMs since GPT-3 and how we might use them. They typically don't have the context window that we need for like the reports that are being written, and they certainly were not cost effective in the early days. That has now changed, and we're working in other ways to how to synthesize the data to reduce the cognitive load and create essentially a digital partner, so to speak. So whether you're an analyst or a detective or patrol, you have something that can help you along the way and help you make better decisions. But we need to be really careful about not getting rid of the underlying data. So if we're going to do a summarization of a case or something like that, we want to make sure that, yeah, we can summarize it, but here's all the case elements that you can still click in and drill in and get the original raw data.
Gotcha. I love it. Well, take off your ForceMetrics hat for a minute, and just based on a guy who has the diverse background who's been to Quantico, what advice or warnings do you have for CTOs, CEOs, tech leaders out there of things they might not be taking so seriously that somebody on the inside who's seen a lot, what kind of warnings do you have for them? I want to ask from a ForceMetrics perspective, but I want to hear kind of your other background first.
Yeah, I don't know if there's any necessarily warnings. I think you certainly need to be adopting AI in all of your processes, whether that's just generating product marketing all the way to actual code development and PR review and things like that. If you're not doing that, you're already behind. Most of the companies that we talk to in our space and other verticals are doing that. And certainly we're seeing the effect on the velocity. We're getting a 10 to 30% velocity increase for some of this work. So definitely don't discount it. I think if you're looking to fundraise and you're kind of an early stage startup. VCs are looking for, how do you do more with less employees now? They're expecting that. So you're not going to be able to go raise a big round and then go spend and scale up with a huge engineering team anymore. That those days are completely over. In fact, they're going to really scrutinize you in those processes. So just kind of think about that as you're going along. And yeah, I'm certainly, we don't really, if anybody could tell you the future of where AI or AGI is going to be, they're a billionaire instantly. So I don't really have any other advice there.
What about from a cybersecurity perspective? I think a lot of small to medium size, even some larger companies don't take it as serious until they're actually breached.
Yeah, I mean, that's the inherent problem since I started cybersecurity work, almost 25 years ago. I think it's become much more complex, the landscape and the tech stack. I mean, we're talking every layer of the OSI model is being attacked at this point, and there's technology and solution in each one of those. So being a chief security officer or a chief information security officer is extremely difficult right now because you pretty much have a non-winning proposition. You're going to get breached.
Slow down innovation, but you got to make sure everything's protected.
And you can't spend $600 million a year like Jamie Dimon, right? Like it's just, like there is a balance, but the tooling and technology is amazing in that space. It's a $300 billion space. It's going to move easily to a $500 billion space. And so, that there's always, it's just like crime. You're always going to have the criminals are going to get an edge, and then you're going to do something to combat that, and then the criminals will get an edge, and it's always the kind of back and forth pendulum effect.
Jason, thank you so much for coming on the show. Man, you're a smart guy, you have an interesting background, and I couldn't love the mission of a company more of what you guys are doing at ForceMetrics. Keep innovating, keep making things safer, and thank you for jumping on the show. Before we wrap, Jason, any final advice you want to give to tech leaders out there who are trying to build, scale, or just survive right now?
Yeah, I would say if you're early on, just do it. It took a long time for me to get to that point where you got to do it. If you got an idea, don't be afraid to fail. And if you fail, take the learnings from that and go to succeed. Just like you say, Steve, with your companies.
My work? I appreciate that.
Yeah, I know your intro, and yeah, it's really true. You're not going to win on every deal. It doesn't matter. You might get killed by a market or some timing or macroeconomics that are out of your control. And so you just got to get into it. And if you like it, stay in it. If you don't, then it might not be for you.
Awesome. Jason, thank you so much. That's it for this episode of Software Leaders Uncensored. I'm Steve Taplin. If you enjoyed the show, go ahead and subscribe. If you didn't join it, you really want to admit that with a guy like Jason on the podcast here and the skills he has? Man, we'll make sure your competitors win. Just teasing, everyone. Remember, fail hard, win big, and always build what matters. See you next time. That's a wrap. Another great episode of Software Leaders Uncensored. Thank you guys so much for listening. I really appreciate it. It's a lot of fun doing this show. I love talking with great tech leaders. As a side note, if you're interested, check out my new book, Fail Hard, Win Big. This is the story of how I built 30 companies, failed on 20, and turned 10 into multi-million-dollar wins. The common thread with all of them was custom software. Also, if you need software development help out there, my company, Sonatify Technology, we deliver world-class software development engineers out of Latin America. We have a solid track record of helping companies launch better products and faster. Thanks again for listening. Appreciate it and appreciate you.